You see, many traders, when they start off trading options, they focus a lot on the flipping of premium. Okay. Whenever you see furus or Instagram gurus or whoever these people are that try to make trading seem easy, which it is not at all, right? They always fantasize or they make you think that, oh, hey, it's all about flipping capital. It's all about that high percentage gain, right? And then whenever they post those gains, they always invoke those feelings of greed, and they try to onboard you onto their success, when we all know that the path towards that is very different for everybody, right? And at AGA, we know that the path is difficult. What we instead help you to do is to find your own path and reduce the number of obstacles on your path as you try to get towards financial freedom, right? But the focus is completely wrong, because they keep thinking that the main focus should be flipping premium, when your real focus should be understanding how options are to be used as the instrument to flip time instead. Time value. Okay? Now, you would have heard time value before, if you remember. Time value is a concept from a previous module, because options have a time concept built into it. Okay? In fact, the very options contracts that you trade are affected by interest rates. They're affected by a variety of different time value components. But don't you think it is important to, once again, before even starting to trade something, understand how it's valued, right? You need to understand how something is valued, where something derives its value from. Then you can know if something is overvalued or undervalued. And then if you know if something is overvalued or undervalued, then you can start to realize if it's a good deal, and then you can start to build a system around that, right? So then you find out if it's a good deal. Then based on whether it's a good deal, you need to figure out if it's a good quality or a bad quality contract, right? And if you know it's a good quality or bad quality contract, you need to make sure that the underlying equity or the stock that you're trading is not going to cause mayhem to your contract. So there are a variety of different things. Because it's a derivative, there are a variety of external factors that influence the price of the options contract. A options contract gets its value from something called a extrinsic value and an intrinsic value. And we'll talk about that in the module to come. But how do we tell if something is a good contract or a bad contract? Well, that's when the Greeks come in, okay? And the Greeks, they allow you to measure different factors that would affect the price of the option, okay? So when we talk about the different Greeks in this next part here, they're all going to influence different parts of the options contract in terms of the price, in terms of how much it's going to decay, in terms of the rate of change, the volatility, etc., etc. Okay, but in a summary, right, the delta is going to help you gauge the likelihood of a contract getting in the money. Okay, it's also going to measure the sensitivity of a contract price with regards to the price of the underlying stock, right? So if, let's say, something has a delta of 0.02, then this means that this has a 20% chance of going in the money, roughly, okay? Now, obviously, this is it varies because of the time value and how close you are to expiry, etc. And then, on top of that, it also means that per $1 move of the underlying stock, the contract price will go either up or down, right? If it's plus $1, you will get plus 0.2 cents added to the contract price. If it's minus $1 on the stock price, then you will get minus 0.2 added onto the contract price. Okay. Then you have gamma. And by the way, I like to think of the entire Greeks as a family. Okay. Family. This is an easy way to remember it. I'll teach you the easiest way to remember it. Delta is like the father, breadwinner of the family. He's going to bring the dough in, right? He's the one that gives a lot of the value to the contract, okay? Especially if the underlying price is going up and down, the contract is going to move synonymously with the delta, right? Then you have gamma. This is the mother. What does the mother always do? What does the wife of a husband always do? Always suspicious, always watching the husband. What is the husband doing? Is he seeing another woman? Is he cheating on me, right? So gamma's job measures the rate of change of delta. You see what I mean? And this all happens with regards to the price of the underlying, right? So gamma's job is to see how fast delta is changing, okay? And then why this is important, we'll get into that a little later. Just try to understand these parts first. Remember, peel the onion, right? And this is, if you want to compare the delta and gamma relationship to something else, like another metaphor, it's like this is speed and this is acceleration, okay? This is how fast the car is moving. This is how fast the car, this is how fast the car is moving in terms of the speed. And this is the change in speed, which is the acceleration, okay? That's more of like a physics metaphor. Sorry if I got technical there. So then you have father and you have mother, right? And this is pretty much to tell you how much delta is going to change. Then you have theta. Theta is the sun, okay? This sun works extra hard to measure the time decay of the contract. But this is a very special sun, okay? This sun tends to procrastinate. If the sun has a long period of time ahead of him and the options contract's not going to really expire anytime soon, then the sun tends to take it easy. So theta is very low. The moment the expiry date comes along, theta is extra hardworking. It's going to decay very, very quickly. And so theta starts to increase and reach its peak in the week of expiry. Okay, we'll also show you that in the next slide. Then you have Vega. Can anyone guess who is Vega? You probably guessed it. The daughter, right? The daughter. Okay, the daughter. And the daughter measures the option sensitivity to volatility, okay? It basically helps you to understand how sensitive an option can be to a large swing in the stock price. That's what Vega can do. Now, don't mistake Vega with another thing called implied volatility, okay? Because this is measuring option sensitivity to volatility per dollar move. But implied volatility is something else. We'll get into that too, okay? So Vega and gamma, you can see, mother and daughter are both very volatile. Do you see that? They're both measuring the change to something, right? This is measuring the option sensitivity to volatility. That's like measuring the sensitivity on something that's very volatile. So Vega itself can be volatile. And then gamma itself is a very volatile one as well because it's measuring the change of delta. So it will be in constant state of flux. So you can see that these two are very linked, right? So if when Vega starts to increase, then the son also gets affected, the father also gets affected, okay? So as I said, they're all linked, they're like a family, all right? Then you have Rho. Rho is the last one, okay? And Rho, you're not really going to understand who he or she is in the family, but Rho is like that uncle or auntie, like the estranged uncle or auntie that shows up once in a while at your Christmas party. You don't really know who they are, but they show up and they still give you a gift anyway. And you're like, well, gee, thanks, right? Rho measures the sensitivity of the options contract to the changes in monetary policy. That means interest rates, right? This is also a time value concept, right? You remember interest rates? We spoke about interest rates in module 1, right? So you can see how everything here has got a sensitivity to time and value, right? That's exactly what I was trying to get at earlier. And the earlier you start to understand this, the better, because it's a complicated subject, right? So Rho will help you to pretty much simulate the effect of like an interest rate change on the options contract, okay? Now, for those of you that don't know what Greeks look like on the options chain, let me just go ahead and show you what it looks like. So for example, if you're using TD Ameritrade, this is where you would find the Greeks. They're on your options chain, right? You have calls and puts, for example, right? And then you have delta, gamma, theta. You can put whichever Greeks you want on here. I'll show you how to do it later. We'll have a live demo of this entire thing. But you can see that they're all here. And they will change based on when the options chain opens. Everything will be moving in a constant flux throughout the whole day. And then you have another column called implied volatility, which is something different, which I will also get into later. Okay. So let's do a deep dive now into each one of these, right? So let's talk about delta first. So the father. let's deep dive into him, right? So as I was mentioning earlier, delta measures the change on every $1 move of the underlying delta for call options. Okay. So by the way, delta moves on a scale of 0 to 1. Okay, so there is only 0 and 1. There's no more than 1. There's no less than 0. And typically seeing 0 or 1 is very rare. Okay, it's always something in between. So it's always a point something. It's a decimal something, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, right? And for put options, it goes from 0 to -1. Why is it negative for puts? Because the price is moving negative. The price is moving down, right? So delta will also move down. Okay, it will add, but remember the options premium will still gain absolute value. So if you have negative price in the underlying stock and then the negative delta, right? So the underlying is moving -$1 and then the delta is moving -0.2. Then that cancels each other out and you get a net positive. That's why the addition to the premium is still positive, and that's why the premium will still move in a positive fashion, right? So the higher the delta, the bigger the price change, okay? And delta never goes higher than 1. Why? Because the option costs less than the stock in most cases, right? There's very rare cases where you see the option contracts cost more than the stock, right? So if the options contract costs less than the stock, then how can you possibly make more money by not owning the stock? Because it's a derivative, right? So just logically speaking, it doesn't make sense, right? So that's why options delta never goes more than 1. The maximum you can make per dollar move of the stock is $1, right? As the stock moves up or down $1, the options contract at peak can only move up and down $1. Make sense? That's why the delta cannot be more than 1. If the delta is more than 1, that means what the options contract will be assuming or assimilating would be that the options contract costs more than the stock, right? Which is not the case. And so then you have calls positive, puts negative delta. I just mentioned this. And I just mentioned how the premium gets positive, right, for a put. So in general, in the money options will move more than out the money options, okay? And short-term options will be more volatile than long-term options. In the money options move more than out the money options because they have moneyness and the ability to be exercised. Right? So a lot of people seek those contracts and they're sought after more than out the money contracts. But why are short-term options more volatile than long-term options? Because it's approaching expiry, and also there are a lot more people who are speculating on minute price changes, right? So here is a typical kind of a movement of the call option. And let's say in this case, delta is 0.5, right? So we would see, if let's say the stock price is $100 and the call option price is $2, and let's say the stock price went down by $1, delta is 0.5, so then this call option price would be reduced by 50 cents, right? To give you 150. And then if it moves another $1, then another 50 cents to $1. And so forth in the next way, in the next direction, in the other direction, it's the same thing. It'll add 50 cents and another 50 cents as the stock price goes up by $1. Okay. This is hypothetical, I know, but in the real world, it doesn't work like that because prices move, irrationally sometimes. And so the addition to each dollar move could be more, but this is the theory. The application could be a different thing altogether, right? Remember, some things are just not going to be exactly the same, but this is you need to start understanding how it works in the bare bones, and then you can see how the sensitivity is in real life. Now, a very easy way to remember how delta values go, if you have at the money option, the delta is typically 0.5. Okay, in the money option, we'll have a delta that is more than 0.5, and out the money option, we'll have a delta that's less than 0.5. Okay. So remember, in the money is more likely to be exercised, right? So therefore the delta is higher. It's a higher probability to be in the money, right? Then at the money is at the door. It's literally at the door, right? You're either in or you're out, right? You're either in or out. You're kind of in between. Am I in? I'm out. Am I in? I'm out, right? That's at the money. So delta is constantly fluxing. And then out the money is where it's less than 0.5 because these options have a lesser chance to be in the money, and possibly they're out the money, and so they have more distance to cover towards the strike price. Okay. Now, let me see if I'm missing anything here. No, I think we covered it all. So delta, that's all you need to know. Now let's move into gamma. Okay. Now, delta is like, delta was the main breadwinner of the family, right? As I was saying, the father. And gamma is the mother. So gamma measures the rate of change of delta over time, right? And so as a stock becomes more volatile, the gamma becomes more volatile, okay? And it tends to peak at the money. We'll look at their relationship in the slides to come, but you should understand that there is a relationship, okay? So it's like the acceleration of delta, and gamma is the highest at the money. High gamma means higher volatility, so higher ups and downs, right? And options with the highest gamma are the most responsive to changes in the underlying stock, right? So in fact, the most nearest term expiry contract that is at the money will have the highest gamma. If a contract is expiring in this week and it's at the money, it'll have the highest gamma, which means it will have the highest rate of change of delta, okay? Now, high gamma is good for options buyers as long as the price is moving in your favorite direction, because it'll add delta quicker, right? And this is obviously because your option will approach a delta of 1 quicker. And then for a seller, you obviously want the opposite, right? Because if you're selling to somebody else, you want it to decay quicker, right? So if a stock price is $100 and let's say the delta is 0.5, the gamma is 2, this is an example, then the rate of change of, how delta will change will be like this. It'll go from 50 to 52, then 52 to 54 because the gamma is 2, right? Or it could go to 48 and 46, so on and so forth, for every $1 change in the price, okay? So, now, if, you have, let's say we have an option with a delta of 0.4, right? And the underlying stock moves down by $1, right? Then sometimes what you're going to realize in the real world, the delta is no longer 0.4, is no longer 0.4. Why? Because the $1 move is now going to push this options contract further out of the money, right? And so the delta has to compensate for it, and you will realize that the delta changes throughout the day, right? So maybe now the delta will be 0.35, okay? Because the stock price went down by $1. So when this delta changes from 0.4 to 0.35, this is the gamma, right? The gamma is 0.05, okay? Because the delta cannot exceed 1, the gamma decreases as the option gets further in the money and delta approaches 1, okay? So you got to think of it like this. It's like there is not enough, there's less room for acceleration as you start to approach the highest speed that you can go, right? So it's kind of like, you can reach high speed first, but then, it kind of gets like, you come to a point where you can't really accelerate that much anymore, right? Okay. That's what I'm trying to get at. And we're going to discuss this further as well. Okay, great. So that's gamma. Now next is theta, okay? Theta measures the time value decay of your contract as the expiry gets closer. If you're selling options contract, theta is going to work in your favor, right? It's your best friend. Remember how, because you receive the premium first, and then as time goes by, the theta is going to decay the contract, and who is that theta going to? It's going to you, right? So theta works against you if you're options buyer because it's going to decay your contract, but if you're option seller, it works for you. And the higher the theta, the steeper the decay in price. So every single day, this will chip away your contract. Let's say the options price started at $10 in day one, then theta is 1, it'll decay to 9, 8, 7, 6 on day 5. Okay, here's just an example. So theta in a nutshell, right, it will tell you how much the option price should decrease or it should decay as the option nears expiry, right? If all other factors obviously stay the same, or, you know, and if other factors change, then theta changes with it, right? So that's what is known as time decay. But you need to know something. Time decay is not linear. Like it's not like, you know, it's not like this. It's more like a curve down, okay? It's more like a curve. And so the price erosion of at the money, or like just slightly out the money, and in the money options are generally like the decay will start to increase as you start to increase as you start to approach out the money. I'm sorry, right? I know it sounds complicated, but I'm gonna try and draw it out for you so you can understand. Okay. So let's say you have I'm just gonna so you have this chart here which shows you the decay of an options contract. Let's say it starts at this price here at 180 or so, and the days to expiry, right? 90 days away, it's at 170. 60 days, so 30 days later, it decays to 140. And then you can see how steep the decay goes at expiry, okay? But what I also want to get at here is there is a difference on how at the money contracts, in the money contracts, and out the money contracts decay, okay? So at the money contracts, they decay kind of like this, and then in the money contracts, they decay like this, and out the money contracts like this. So they kind of go like at the money, in the money, and out the money. Okay. This is days to expiry. Okay. Let's say they all end at 0. All right. So the time value erosion is not linear, meaning the price erosion of the at the money option, just slightly out of the money option, and the in the money option generally increases as the expiration approaches. And the far out the money options generally decreases as the expiry nears. Okay? So that's what you need to know. Now, short-term expiries will see higher theta decay than long-term expiries, which is something that I was mentioning in this chart. So notice how the value of the at the money option decays at an increasing rate towards expiry versus an in the money or at the money option. Sorry, in the money or out the money option, right? You can see the at the money one has the most decaying to do, right? Why is it like that? Because at the money options have the most time value built into the premiums. Okay, the more there is, the more can be lost. So I know this is all very complicated and you might be starting to get overwhelmed, but don't worry, everything's going to come together later. Okay, remember, peel the onion. You gotta do it step by step, right? So you understand individual things first, and then when we put them together, you'll understand, right? When we're selecting contracts, why we do certain things. Not to mention when you attend the live trading sessions and you hear me tell you why we take this contract over that contract, you'll start to understand very quickly why we do things the way we do, or why are these things important, right? So next up is Vega. Now, Vega is pretty much the measure of the options sensitivity to volatility per $1 move, right? We mentioned this. measures the risk of changes in implied volatility, focus on changes in expectations for future volatility, and higher volatility makes the options more expensive. So higher the Vega, the more expensive the option. Option sellers benefit from a fall in rapidly falling IV, okay? But it is just the reverse for options buyers. So think about it this way. When everybody's buying the same contracts, the implied volatility will start to rise, okay? This also causes the Vega of the options contract to rise. Now, Vega is not the same as implied volatility, but it's linked, okay? As I was mentioning here. Because Vega will measure the change in call and put prices with respect to the 1 point change in implied volatility, okay? And it doesn't really affect the intrinsic value of the option, but it affects the time value of the option's price. So when the IV increases, the value of the option increases because all the options are more sought after. As I was telling you, everybody wants a piece of the action, right? So volatility is really one of the more important factors that affect the value of options. And when implied volatility or volatility generally rises, all options contracts become more expensive. And when it drops very quickly, then it goes through something called a crush. Okay, we'll explain more about that later as well. So, if you don't understand what Vega is, there's a very high chance that you're going to overpay with options. Now, I've devised a very easy understanding on implied volatilities, and I'll share it with you later. So you don't really need to stress too much if you don't understand Vega, or if for some reason it's not a concept that you can gel with, because I'm going to simplify it down for you later so that it's really easy for you to follow, okay? But what you need to understand is, if everybody's rushing towards the same contract and the option chain, you need to be really careful, okay? As you can see in this chart here, let's say you have two types of contracts, one with 30 days to expiry and one with 365 days to expiry. Obviously, the longer time frame one, right, is going to be much more expensive, right? And the reason why this is so is also, you got to see that the Vega here is much more, okay? It could be so that this contract's more sought after, so therefore it causes a bigger value for that contract, okay? So I'll show you, I will share with you my cheat sheet for implied volatility in the next slides to come. But for now, let's wrap it up with rho to close out the understanding of the Greeks here. So you have rho now, and rho is the measure of the options changes to interest rates, right? So it tells you how much the price of an option should rise or fall if the U.S. Treasury bills, which is usually it's the U.S. 10-year Treasury bills, so this is the most common Treasury bill that we link it to, if those interest rates start to rise or decrease, okay? And rho is positive for calls, long calls, and it increases with the price of the stock. And rho is negative for long puts, okay? And it approaches zero as the stock price increases. Now, when rho is acting on the options contract, this typically happens when interest rates are changing. So it doesn't really affect options in the short term that much, as I was saying. It doesn't really affect it that much. Because, as I was saying, it's like that estranged auntie or uncle that shows up once in a while to the Christmas party, right? And you're kind of like, oh, okay, cool, you showed up, right? But it does affect longer dated options. We are mainly called leaps, okay? Long expiry anticipation contracts, basically. Long expiry anticipation positions. I believe that's what a leap is, right? So when we buy an options contract that's more than 9 months out in terms of expiry, we call those leaps. And then the interest rate risk is higher with those contracts because there's a very high risk for monetary policy to keep developing in a longer period of time. And therefore, the effect of roll on those contracts are generally higher, right? But in an environment like right now where interest rates are changing pretty effectively, it does affect longer term contracts, right? And obviously the higher the price of the stock, then the longer the time until expiry generally means a greater sensitivity to changes in interest rates, which will equate to the higher absolute roll values. So the only reason why people really care about roll is because of this. Because there's a higher carry cost to carry, or basically for institutions who do a lot of share replacement, okay? What is share replacement? It's when you don't want to spend, let's say you can buy 100 shares of Apple, right? At $120 per share, right? And you would spend $12,000, right? Well, I could choose to replace this shares with the options contract. And that options contract could be for a long period of time. So that's what we call share replacement, because the options contract would only be a fraction of this. Let's say you were to buy this same contract and it's a 120 strike. Let's say it's an in the money contract, right? And you're betting on Apple to be higher than 120 in a couple of years from now, right? Then by replacing that the shares with the contract at, let's say, $2,400 per contract or something like that, right? You would get the same effect, but with a very, very little fraction of the cost of the original cost. So because that contract might be at a 2 years expiry, it's a very far out expiry, right? And the longer time until expiration will have a greater sensitivity to interest rates. That's why that's a problem, right? Because you don't know how interest rates will be changing. And so that's how roll affects your contracts, okay? Great. So this is where we're going to end it for this portion of the module on the Greeks. Now, next, I'm going to talk to you guys about the relationship between delta and gamma, and then a bunch more other things. So I'll see you in the next module really soon.